Was this ridiculously high line a stroke of genius or an example of Ange Ball going very, very wrong? Well, with devastating injuries, horror tackles, and 4 disallowed goals, I'm going to tell you how Ange Postecoglou just became the bravest manager in the league. Spurs headed into this game as the only unbeaten team in the Premier League, and they came out of the blocks flying. With Chelsea's narrow mid-block, it allowed for Tottenham to build up in wide areas and led to this spectacular pass from James Maddison.
Super ball for Son, who has Kulusevski wide. Son through the middle, Johnson getting forward. Misses. Dejan Kulusevski! It's deflected in! And Spurs have scored in no time!
It looked like it could be a total battering in North London, with Tottenham scoring 2 goals past Chelsea in the opening 15 minutes of the game, with the latter being chalked off for offside. But in fact, since that moment, Tottenham lost total control of the game.
As soon as they scored the goal, they've lost their heads.
Ange and his players should be blamed for the result. A game of such fiery history and such a physical start, Spurs should have settled into a rhythm and taken control of the tempo, as they were clearly the better side. But being drawn into a fight is exactly what Chelsea favoured, and a fight is exactly what we got. First of all, Romero should have been red carded for an earlier kick out at Colwill, but of course he made up for it with a horrible follow through on Fernandes and gave Chelsea a way back into the game, and the Argentine was red carded. Udogie could have seen red after a horrible 2-footed lunge on Sterling, but he did see his second yellow after again a tackle on Sterling after a complete lack of composure. And Tottenham, although level on the scoreboard, found themselves 9 versus 11 on the pitch. But somehow that wasn't the only thing that went wrong. A seemingly innocuous injury of James Maddison meant that the Englishman had to be subbed, and Spurs were without that deep creativity in their midfield. And in the words of Peter Jury, when it rains, it pours for Tottenham, as the Flying Dutchman pulled his hamstring in a foot race with Nicholas Jackson, and suddenly Spurs found themselves without their 2 first-choice centre-backs. Having to cover large distances at rapid speed had seemed to take a toll on the back line, and Ange Ball was beginning to crumble, perhaps a foreshadowing for what was about to come. Literally everything was going wrong for Tottenham. They were architects of their own downfall, lost in the emotion of sitting at the top of the Premier League. Karma had reared its ugly head. But Ange was about to flex his massive Postacoglou's. With 9 men and seemingly everything going against them, we expected Ange's team to drop by 20 or 30 yards and settle into a low block and hope for a draw, but not Postacoglou. Instead, like an anorexic stoner, Spurs sat high and narrow, possibly the highest line you have ever seen, and compressed the pitch into the middle third and actually gave Spurs a lot of advantages. See, a high line does not need to be sacrificed in the absence of players, as it only relies on 3 things: the recovery pace of your centre-backs, VAR, and the ability for your goalkeeper to come off of his line, and all 3 of these things can be done effectively with 9 men. Instead, Postecoglou played a game of percentages, relying on the coaching of his backline to catch Chelsea in offside positions, and in turn it meant that Chelsea themselves had a high line, further negating any midfield space. This meant that Spurs could continue to defend in the way that they had been coached, and in fact when they got the ball, they didn't have to transition it through the thirds with limited players in the build-up, as the ball was much higher up the pitch than what it would have been. And in addition to all of this, they had a high line in Chelsea's to exploit themselves. It actually gives Tottenham a far more balanced opportunity to score themselves than if they were 20 or 30 yards backwards, and it's the type of front foot approach that we knew Postecoglou would bring. It just baffles us all when we see it firsthand. In fact, if you want even more details as to why this might have been the correct approach, after you finish this video, go watch my newest podcast episode dedicated to this tactic. Of course, we have to address the elephant in the room. The back line was broken, and broken many times, but that's what happens when you play the game of percentages. Spurs could and probably should have equalised, only possible to their high back line. But once Chelsea opened the floodgates, they scored 4, and it leaves us with questions. Was this the correct tactic? Maybe. Did things go wrong for Tottenham? Definitely. But did they go wrong in the most beautiful and courageous of ways? Almost certainly.